The greatest detective novel in history, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, The Red-Headed League.
It was one of those dull autumn days in London when I dropped by Baker Street to see my friend Sherlock Holmes. I hadn't been around for a few weeks, caught up in my medical practice, and I missed our conversations. When I entered, I found him sitting in his armchair, deep in thought, while across from him sat a man I had never seen before. Holmes greeted me with his usual quick smile. "Ah, Watson, good. You've just come in to hear a most curious case." The man sitting there was extraordinary looking. He was overweight, well-dressed, and his hair, well, I can hardly describe it without smiling. It was blazing red, not the usual ginger or auburn, but the brightest flame-colored hair I had ever seen. His round face and heavy build made his appearance almost comical. Holmes motioned for me to sit. "This gentleman," he said, "is Mr. Jabez Wilson, a pawnbroker from the city. He's been kind enough to tell me his story, and I thought you might enjoy hearing it as well." Mr. Wilson nodded politely. "As long as it helps me get some advice, I'm happy to repeat it," he said, in a slow, rather ponderous way. Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Please, Mr. Wilson, begin again for my friend. Tell the story exactly as you told me." Wilson's story. "Well, doctor," Wilson began, "I run a small pawn shop at Coburg Square, near the city. I'm not a rich man, but I make a fair living. I only have one assistant, Vincent Spaulding. Bright young fellow, works for half wages because he says he wants to learn the trade. Best assistant I ever had, though," he frowned, "he's always in the cellar, developing photographs. It's his hobby. I don't mind as long as the business runs." Holmes murmured, "A curious hobby in a cellar. Go on." "One morning," Wilson continued, "Spaulding came up holding a newspaper, very excited. He said, 'Mr. Wilson, have you heard of the Red-Headed League?' Of course I hadn't. He explained that a wealthy American left a great fortune to start a league to support men with red hair. Only red-haired men could apply. They gave well-paid, easy jobs to members." Holmes raised his eyebrows. "Indeed, a league for red hair." "Yes, sir. Spaulding said it was an opportunity too good to miss. He urged me to apply, since, as you can see—" Wilson tapped his flaming head. "My hair is about as red as it gets. The next morning he practically dragged me to the address listed, a small office near Fleet Street. There was a crowd of red-headed men waiting. You've never seen so many shades of red hair together in one place. Some were dark, some almost orange. But Spaulding pushed me through them, right to the office." Wilson chuckled at the memory. "A clerk came out. He said my hair was exactly the shade they wanted. Before I knew it, I was taken straight into the office of the manager, a Mr. Duncan Ross. He was red-headed himself, though not as bright as mine. He explained that the League paid £4 a week, good money, for easy work, just sitting in their office, copying out pages of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Watson, me, couldn't help blurting out, "Surely, Mr. Wilson, you must have thought it odd." He shrugged. "It did seem a bit strange, doctor. But the pay was excellent for simple work. I accepted at once. They told me to come in every day from 10 to 2, and under no circumstances was I to leave the office during those hours. If I left, I'd lose the job." Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. "And what did you have to do exactly?" Nothing but copy out the encyclopedia, day after day, page after page. It was dull work, but easy. £4 a week, remember. This went on for about 8 weeks. Then, one morning, I arrived and found the office locked. A sign on the door read, "The Red-Headed League is dissolved." Just like that. No notice, no explanation. I hurried to find Mr. Duncan Ross, but he was gone. The landlord knew nothing except that the office was rented short-term. I was left standing there, out of work. Wilson spread his hands helplessly. "So here I am, Mr. Holmes. I don't understand what it all meant. Why was I paid so much for such useless work? And why has the League vanished without a trace?" Holmes had been listening intently, his sharp eyes fixed on Wilson. He now leaned forward. "Mr. Wilson, your case is indeed strange. I will gladly look into it. But first, may I ask, is there anything about your assistant, Mr. Spaulding, that struck you as unusual?" "Not much," Wilson said. "He's very smart, works hard, though he's always eager to run errands. And, as I mentioned, he spends a lot of time in the cellar with his photography. Otherwise, nothing remarkable." Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. I could tell his mind was already racing. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Leave it with me. I believe I can solve this little mystery within a day or two." Mr. Jabez Wilson had just finished his strange account of the League of Red-Headed Men and the odd work he had been given, copying out the Encyclopedia Britannica for good pay, only to have it suddenly end without warning. I sat back, puzzled by the sheer absurdity of it. Holmes, however, leaned forward in his chair with a glint of excitement in his eyes. Holmes lit his pipe and leaned back, blowing out a thin stream of smoke. "This is indeed a very curious case," he said. "There are some features about it that make it absolutely unique. To my mind, Mr. Wilson, it contains strong indications of a deeper and more serious purpose than the shallow joke you suppose it to be." "Deeper purpose?" asked Wilson. Holmes nodded. "Yes. As far as I can make out, the League was simply a cover, a means of keeping you away from your shop for several hours each day. The job itself was trivial, but the conditions under which it was carried out were most unusual. That is what makes it interesting." I couldn't help blurting out, "But what on earth could be the object of such a scheme, Holmes?" "That, my dear Watson, is what we are going to find out," said Holmes, smiling faintly. "I'll need to think this through, but first, Mr. Wilson, I should like to ask you a few more questions." "Ask away, sir," our client said, rubbing his hands nervously. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "First, how long have you been in business?" "About 30 years," Wilson replied. "And in this shop in Saxe-Coburg Square?" 17 years. "Any good trade?" "Fair. Once I had 2 assistants. Now I only keep 1. Holmes raised his eyebrows. "Just 1 assistant. And his name?" "Vincent Spaulding. He's willing to come for half wages. A first-class assistant, too. He's not very smart in appearance, but he works hard. Photography is his passion. He often dives down into the cellar to develop his pictures." Holmes sat up a little straighter. "Cellar, you say?" "Yes." "Anything else about him?" "Well, he's not particularly tall, but he is very quick and sharp. He has pierced ears, if you can believe it." Holmes exchanged a glance with me, and I saw that familiar spark in his eye that always signaled he was on to something. "Mr. Wilson," Holmes said, "could you describe the entrance to your shop?" "2 windows facing the street, a little door between. Nothing remarkable." "And behind?" "There's a small yard at the back and a lane that runs into another street." Holmes leaned back again. "That's enough for now. Watson, do you recall the old saying about strange effects from commonplace causes?" "Of course," I said, though I was still in the dark. This case may be one of them. Mr. Wilson, thank you. I'd like to visit your shop tomorrow and have a look around. Until then, keep everything as usual. Do not let your assistant suspect that you are concerned." "Very well, Mr. Holmes," Wilson said, rising. "I'll do just that." When our client had gone, I turned to Holmes eagerly. "Surely, Holmes, you already have some clue." "My dear Watson," he said, chuckling, "you know me too well. Of course I have some ideas, but I'd prefer to test them before speaking too soon. For now, what do you say to a walk tomorrow? I think you'll enjoy it." And with that, Holmes settled back in his chair, his eyes gleaming with that restless energy that always appeared when a case began to unfold before him. I hardly saw Holmes the rest of that day. He disappeared into his own thoughts, scribbling notes, pacing the room, and vanishing outside once or twice without a word of explanation. By the next morning, however, he was as lively as ever. "Come, Watson," he said briskly after breakfast. "Put on your hat. We're going for a little walk." "A case-related walk, I presume?" I asked. Holmes grinned. "My dear Watson, you know I never stroll without a purpose." And so, a short while later, we set off into the brisk London air. Our route took us through busy streets until at last we reached a dingy little square with 4 rows of shabby houses. "This is Saxe-Coburg Square," Holmes announced, sweeping his hand around. The square was indeed unremarkable. Dull brick buildings, worn-out shutters, and children playing noisily at the fountain in the middle. Yet I could see Holmes's eyes darting here and there, catching every detail. "Quite an unpretentious neighborhood," I remarked. "Exactly," Holmes exclaimed. "And yet, my dear Watson, the commonplace is where the extraordinary hides itself. Observe." We stopped before a small shop with a faded sign, "Jabez Wilson, pawnbroker." Holmes leaned against the lamp-post opposite, pretending to read the paper, while his sharp eyes roved over the building. He noted the neighboring shops, the width of the pavement, the paving stones themselves. He even rapped his stick along the pavement in the shop front. "Nothing remarkable?" I whispered. "On the contrary," Holmes said softly, "everything is remarkable. Come along, Watson." He led me quickly down the side street. At the back of the shop was a narrow alleyway ending at a small archway. Holmes stopped, tapped the ground with his stick, peered at the layout, and studied the houses beyond. Then, to my astonishment, he suddenly dropped to his knees and examined the stones of the pavement with a magnifying glass he had pulled from his pocket. Passers-by stared, but Holmes didn't care in the least. When he seemed satisfied, he sprang back up with a grin. "All is well. Come, Watson. Now let us go and make the acquaintance of Mr. Merriweather at the bank tonight." "The bank?" I repeated, thoroughly confused. Holmes gave me a playful smile. "Patience, Watson. Tonight we'll give you all the answers." And with that, he hailed a cab and whisked us back toward Baker Street, leaving me more mystified than ever. That evening, after dinner, Holmes pulled on his coat and hat. "Come, Watson," he said. "We have a little business at St. James's Hall first, then the real work begins." To my surprise, he marched me into a music hall where Saracet, the great violinist, was performing. Holmes sat back with his eyes half closed, utterly enraptured by the music. I could hardly focus, my mind too restless with curiosity about the case. Yet Holmes seemed as relaxed as if he had no care in the world. When the last note had faded and applause echoed, Holmes jumped up. "Now, my dear Watson, we are ready for the night's adventure." He hailed a cab, and we drove through darkening London streets until we stopped before a stately building. Holmes led me down a side door where a man with a lantern waited. "Mr. Merryweather?" Holmes asked. "The same," the man replied, shaking his hand. "And you must be Mr. Holmes. This is most inconvenient, you know, keeping me away from my game of whist." Holmes smiled. "I assure you, sir, the inconvenience will prove worth it. You would not enjoy discovering tomorrow morning that your bank had been looted." The banker grunted, but opened the door and led us into a cavernous underground cellar. The air was musty and heavy, the walls lined with great boxes and crates. "This," Merryweather explained, tapping a large pile of cases, "is gold, 30,000 pounds worth, recently brought from France. It's why we've been such an attractive target." Holmes' eyes glittered. "Exactly what I expected. Now, gentlemen, follow my lead. We must remain perfectly silent." He motioned us to crouch behind a stack of crates where we were swallowed in shadow. The wait was long. The darkness pressed in on us. I could hear only the beating of my own heart, the slow drip of water in the cellar, and Holmes' steady breathing. At last, faint sounds reached us, a scraping noise, like stone against stone, a sudden dull thud. Then, slowly, a square of the floor lifted up. A hand appeared, then a head, followed by the body of a man climbing through the hole. Behind him another figure emerged. The first man struck a match and held up a lantern. It was John Clay, the notorious criminal Holmes had mentioned once or more in the past. Slim, well-dressed, with a pale, cunning face. He whispered to his companion, "Quick, Archie, the coast's clear. The boxes of gold are right here." But before they could take a single step, Holmes's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "You'll do no such thing, Mr. John Clay. You're caught in the act." The two men spun in shock. Clay's eyes narrowed, then he drew a revolver, but Holmes was faster. In a flash he was on him, seizing his wrist, twisting the weapon free. I leapt forward to help, while Merryweather and the police inspector Holmes had secretly arranged rushed in from the side door. Clay fought like a wildcat, but Holmes's grip was iron. Within moments, both men were overpowered, handcuffed, and furious. Holmes dusted off his hands calmly. And so ends the adventure of the Red-Headed League. The next morning, Holmes and I sat by the fire in our Baker Street rooms. The adventure of the Red-Headed League was over. The criminals caught, the gold saved. Yet, as always, I wanted to know how Holmes had put the puzzle together so perfectly. I could not hold back my question. Watson, me. "Holmes, you must explain it all. From the first moment, you seemed to know something was wrong. What gave it away?" Holmes leaned back in his chair, lit his pipe, and smiled at me. "Holmes, it was Wilson's assistant, Vincent Spaulding, that caught my attention. He was too clever to be earning half wages in a pawn shop. His face, his manner, I knew at once he was John Clay, the notorious criminal. I've read enough about him to recognize his type." I nodded, remembering the pale, sharp features of the man we caught. "Watson, but what about the League, the strange job of copying out the encyclopedia?" Holmes chuckled. "Holmes, that was the trick, Watson. They needed to keep Wilson out of the shop every day for hours at a time. How better to invent a nonsense job, one that paid him well and flattered his vanity? The League was an illusion, designed only to occupy him while they worked undisturbed." Watson, so while Wilson sat writing, they were digging. Holmes, exactly. The pawn shop was perfect, next door to the bank, with a cellar leading the right way. When I tapped on the floor of Wilson's shop, it sounded hollow. That confirmed the tunnel. I knew they had been digging for weeks. I leaned forward eagerly. Watson, but how did you know when they would strike? Holmes blew a thin stream of smoke and answered calmly. Holmes, the League had suddenly dissolved. That meant the tunnel was finished. Saturday night was the best time, with no business at the bank until Monday. So we only had to be there, waiting. I could not help but laugh in admiration. Watson, brilliant as always, Holmes, you saw through every part of it, while the rest of us were blind. Holmes waved the compliment aside with his hand. Nonsense, my dear Watson. It was merely observation and deduction. Clay was clever, but not clever enough. And in the end, crime, however ingenious, leaves a trace. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. So you see, Watson, the Red-Headed League was never a league at all, only a trick, a mask for robbery. It is a reminder that behind the most absurd stories there may lie the gravest dangers. With that, Holmes settled back in his chair, and I, as ever, felt the thrill of being witness to his extraordinary mind at work. And so ended the curious affair of the Red-Headed League.